how do you manage decline? And there's ebbs and flows and structural changes, but we have this huge demographic change that's occurring in many places. And so I don't think this issue is going to go away, and maybe there are some lessons we can learn from the Detroit experience that not only apply to maybe other struggling cities in the United States, but other struggling places throughout the globe as we go through structural shifts. So this is a change in our demographics in the Detroit urban environment. In 1960, most of the African American population, as you can see, was within the borders of Detroit. And now, with all the changes that have taken place over the past several decades, it's much more spread out. So we're less segregated than we used to be. And maybe that's a positive result of some of the changes that have occurred. Again, we could talk for a long time about why Detroit experienced this long-run decline. We can certainly point to manufacturing decline in the United States and global forces. We certainly have had our share of racial tension in the region, and it continues today. We can also talk about sort of policies that may have exacerbated the challenges, and Detroit's tax rates are among the highest in the state, in part to fund debt, which has been growing. We could talk about land use policies in the region, provision of, or lack thereof, provision of public services, quality of schools. On the ground today, about 40% of streetlights are not functioning in the city. The highest, has the highest crime rate among large cities. The police response time is about 47 minutes. The national average is about 11 minutes. These are sort of crime incidents and case clearances, and I'll just point to property crime, burglary, larceny, and theft, and motor vehicle theft. In this year, I think this was 2012, there were almost 44,000 property crimes, of which about 1,800 were cleared. A massive amount of uncleared cases. The probability of getting caught is quite low. So this is a huge priority for the new mayor coming in, is how do we get a handle on providing basic public services, and they're making changes right now to try to address these challenges. But clearly this is a challenge and a push of people moving out of the city. You can kind of see what happened over the past decade or so. In 2001, we had that relatively mild recession in the United States. Michigan never really recovered from that recession. Beginning in 2001 and 2002, Michigan had net job declines up until about through 2012. And then we finally started growing again. Huge structural changes, right? And so during this period, Detroit, at least what we observed on the books, looked like it was hanging tough until we hit 2000 and 2008, when the Great Recession really took hold, and you can see the deficits rising. The key here is the true deficits were unrevealed by interesting debt restructuring and underfunding of retiree benefit accounts, etc. And in fact, that has been a key issue of the bankruptcy and some things that have happened there. You can see what happened to the city income tax over this period, steadily declining. Property taxes held steady for quite some time and started to decline here. And as I'll show, I think a little bit later on, this really should have tanked if assessments kept up with what was happening with market prices, market valuations. You can see that as the income tax was falling, that was offset to some degree by casino and gaming taxes, but that has fallen off as well. So those are the main own source revenues. Right now, the total debt and unfunded liabilities for the city is about $18 billion. I like to put that number in something that I can sort of understand the scale a little bit better. Once we start talking about billions and trillions of dollars, it's sort of hard for me to understand. So I just put it in per Detroit households. And that's about $68,000 per household. The median household income is about $25,000. The poverty rate for a family of 4 at a household level is about $24,000. So that gives you a scope of the challenge. They couldn't possibly pay for this, right, on their own. So bankruptcy is in process, as we all know. Let me give you some Detroit economic and demographic information that I pulled this past week. Median household income, again, about $25,000. Poverty rate, about 38%. The population, about 700,000. The population that's 16 years and older is about 554,000. Of that, the labor force is almost 300,000, with a labor force participation rate of 54%. The U.S. average labor force participation rate is about 62%, and that's as low as it's been in many years. The unemployment, the total employed is about 216,000, the unemployed 82,000, so, and then finally those not in the labor force, about 256,000. The unemployment rate is about 28%, a little bit higher than what you said, Joan. And those on Social Security disability is about 34,000. There was a recent article that I read about Social Security disability, and as we have gone through this recession, these really tough times, it's sort of been a substitute for unemployment benefits. And so there are, in the U.S., about 11 million people who are on Social Security disability. That's more people in the state than the state of Michigan, which is about 9 million. In Detroit, it's, you know, if you think about the number of people who are employed versus those here, that's about, for every 7 workers, 1 person is on disability. And then there are all people with Social Security for retirees and stuff, about 148,000. So that kind of gives you a sense of sort of the economic and demographic situation in Detroit and the challenge, right? How does one build an economic base from this? And it's a big challenge, right? In a broader context, we know there are places elsewhere around the country that have their own challenges. Underfunding of retiree compensation is a big issue. Late last year, after the courts ruled that on the bankruptcy in Detroit that they could proceed, Rahm Emanuel said this: should Chicago fail to get a pension relief soon, we will be faced with a 2015 budget that will either double city property taxes or we'll have to eliminate vital services that people rely on. So that's Chicago. So I don't know exactly what's happening since that time, since that announcement, but it's a big issue. In Illinois, underfunding of state retiree benefits is again a big challenge. Recent legislation kind of was passed quietly, and they did not raise taxes to fund the pensions. They made changes to the pension payment framework, kind of in a progressive sense, where those in the higher income groups are not going to get as much or not as much growth as had been before. And they tried to preserve the pension benefits for the lowest income pensioners. And so that has emerged. California has significantly underfunded retirement benefits as well. A recent paper that just came out tried to quantify all this and looking at different scenarios and discount rates and things, and looking at underfunding of state and local retirement obligations. Their midpoint range under a set of assumptions is that taxes would have to increase by almost $1,400 per household starting today and moving into the future to fund all of the state and local pension and retiree promises. Of course, this varies, right? There are some places that are in good shape and they're on top of it, and other places that are really struggling.